Welcome back, everyone, to the Deep Dive. Today, we are going deep into the world of red teaming.
Yes, red teaming.
And to help us out, we've got some really fascinating material to work with today.
Yeah, we've got a really comprehensive interview with a red teamer talking about how they do their work.
Oh, yeah.
Kind of all the nuts and bolts of, everything from the frameworks they use down to the specific exploits they're looking at.
That's awesome.
And then along with that, we've got a guide for how to even prepare to get into this field, which seems like it could be quite a challenge.
Oh, yeah. That's going to be interesting.
So we're looking at excerpts from a comprehensive red team interview that gets into those real technical weeds, things like command and control frameworks, how to get past XDR and AMSI, those clever living off the land attacks. We even touch on how exploits fit into the whole picture.
Oh, cool.
And then we've got selections from effective preparation for advanced red teaming and security architecture topics. And that's going to give us a really good sense of what it takes to get ready for this type of work.
So what we're going to try to do today is extract the really key takeaways and those aha moments.
Right.
And present that to you guys in a way that is both clear and engaging, but also gives you a genuine understanding of how this stuff works.
Exactly.
So let's just jump right into it.
It's good.
I think the first thing to understand is these command and control frameworks.
Right.
Can you give us a quick rundown on what are these things? What do they do?
Sure. So basically, when you're talking about C2 frameworks, we're talking about the central nervous system of a red team operation.
Okay.
So the way this works is they provide that crucial communication channel between the red team operators
Got it.
and the systems that they've compromised.
Okay.
So this is the way that they're going to issue commands to those compromised systems, receive data back from them, and basically orchestrate the entire operation from a central location.
Makes sense.
So without a solid C2 framework, it would be like the red team is operating blind.
Yeah.
They really need this in order to do their work effectively.
So when red teamers are looking to choose one of these frameworks,
Yeah.
what are the essential features that they're looking for?
Well, there are several key things that come to mind.
Okay.
So first off, the underlying architecture is generally client-server.
Sure.
So you're going to have the C2 server that's kind of the brain of the operation.
Right.
And then you've got the agent, which is sometimes called a beacon or an implant. And that's going to reside on the compromised machine.
Okay.
And it's going to act as the eyes and ears of the server.
Gotcha.
So that's the fundamental architecture. But then when you start thinking about the more, the sort of features that make a framework effective, stealth and evasion are absolutely critical.
Right.
These frameworks have to blend in with normal network traffic, and they use things like encryption and obfuscation in order to avoid detection by security tools.
So they want to be as invisible as possible.
Absolutely. They don't want to be detected.
Yeah.
Another key feature is automation. So operators need to be able to efficiently manage multiple compromised systems at the same time. And then there's customization.
Right.
Frameworks like Cobalt Strike and Mythic, for example, are incredibly flexible, allowing operators to tailor their tools and their communication methods to the specific environment that they're testing.
Got it.
And finally, cross-platform support is really important.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Because these days, you're not just attacking Windows machines. You could be attacking Mac OS. You could be attacking Linux.
Right.
So most modern C2 frameworks offer support for all three major operating systems.
So you mentioned some advanced C2 techniques.
Yes.
What are some of those things that are kind of taking it to the next level?
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting.
Okay.
So one of the things is beaconing.
Okay.
So beaconing is that periodic check-in from the compromised system back to the C2 server. And because it's happening very infrequently, maybe every few minutes or even every few hours, it can be hard for defenders to detect because it's not constant communication.
That makes sense.
Then you have malleable C2 profiles.
Okay.
And these are profiles that allow for really granular customization of network traffic.
Okay.
So imagine being able to make your malicious traffic look exactly like legitimate communication from a well-known application.
Where?
That's the kind of control that these profiles give you.
That's amazing.
And they can tweak everything from the order of the HTTP headers
Mm-hmm.
to the timing of the network packets to really make it blend in.
Wow.
Living off the LAN or LOL techniques are also very important.
Right.
And this is where the C2 framework can leverage legitimate tools that are already present on the system.
Okay.
So things like PowerShell or WMI to
Right.
execute commands.
Okay.
And because it's using tools that are supposed to be there, it can be very hard to distinguish from normal activity.
Right.
And then finally, we have dynamic code generation. And this is a technique where the C2 framework actually creates unique one-off payloads each time.
Oh, wow.
So signature-based antivirus, which relies on recognizing known patterns, has a much harder time detecting these types of attacks.
Oh, that's really interesting. So our sources highlight a few of the big players in this world of C2 frameworks.
Yeah.
Could you give us a quick breakdown of who's who in the zoo?
Sure. So Cobalt Strike is probably the most well-known commercial option out there.
Okay.
It's highly customizable. It's got the malleable C2 profiles we talked about.
Mm-hmm.
It's got a beacon agent. It's very popular. The downside is because it's so widely used.
Right.
It's also very heavily signatured,
Yeah.
meaning that a lot of security teams are actively looking for its unique characteristics.
Right.
So it's kind of this arms race
Yeah.
where the red teams have to constantly customize and tweak their Cobalt Strike configurations to try and stay ahead.
I see.
So then you've got Sliver, which is an open source framework that's been gaining a lot of traction lately. It's cross-platform. It uses mutual TLS for secure communication.
Mm-hmm.
It also features that dynamic code generation we talked about, which makes it a bit less detectable than Cobalt Strike, at least for now.
For now, yeah.
Yeah, as it becomes more popular.
It's probably catch up.
It's going to be more on the radar.
Yeah.
And then you have Brute Retel C4.
Okay.
This is another commercial tool. It's known for really advanced evasion techniques.
Okay.
Things like indirect system calls, which is essentially a way of whispering commands to the kernel,
Oh, wow.
and thread stack encryption.
Oh, interesting.
So it's really good at bypassing EDR and AV, but it's also very expensive.
Right.
And generally only used by really sophisticated operators.
Yeah, if you got the money.
Yeah.
So they got Mythic.
Yes. Mythic is a really interesting open source option.
Okay.
It's modular. It's built on top of Docker.
Okay.
And it actually integrates directly with the Amaniari ATT&CK framework,
Mm-hmm.
which is really useful because it allows you to align your simulations with real-world threats.
Right.
It's considered pretty user-friendly for an open source tool.
That's good.
And then finally, you've got Havoc, which is another open source modular framework.
Okay.
It's got built-in AV and EDR bypass techniques.
Mm-hmm.
It's free, which is a plus.
That is a plus, yeah.
But the community support is a little bit smaller compared to some of the other frameworks.
I see. You mentioned Mighty ATT&CK a couple of times now.
Yes.
What is it about the integration with the ATT&CK framework that is so significant?
What's really valuable about the integration with ATT&CK is that it allows red teams to think and operate in a way that mirrors real-world cyber adversaries.
Okay.
So Einary ATT&CK is kind of like a comprehensive encyclopedia of the tactics, techniques, and procedures that attackers use.
Mm-hmm.
So by mapping C2 framework activities to specific ATT&CK techniques, for example, using HTTP for C2 communication, which falls under the application layer protocol technique within the command and control tactic, red teams can make sure that their simulations are not just technically proficient, but that they are also relevant to the real threats that companies face.
Oh, I see.
It really provides a common language and a framework for planning, executing, and documenting these engagements.
Okay, that makes sense. So it sounds like a never-ending chess game, right, between attackers and defenders.
Absolutely.
So what are some of the big challenges that C2 frameworks are facing today?
Yeah, so the biggest hurdle right now is definitely detection.
Okay.
Advanced security solutions, EDR, XDR, they're getting much better at using things like machine learning and behavioral analytics to identify C2 activity, even if it's heavily obfuscated.
Mm-hmm.
And the more widely used frameworks like Cobalt Strike,
Right.
and to a certain extent now, Sliver, are under constant scrutiny, which means the red teams are in a perpetual cycle of updating and customizing their tools.
Yeah, they got to stay ahead.
We got to stay ahead of the game. Looking forward, I think we're going to see more adoption of cloud-based C2 infrastructure,
Okay.
just because it offers better scalability and the potential for evasion.
Mm-hmm.
And we might even see attackers using AI and machine learning to automate parts of their operations and refine evasion techniques even further.
Oh, wow.
So I think we're going to see much more sophisticated evasion methods.
Yeah.
Things like proxy-based approaches and the use of adversarial samples, which are basically malicious files that are designed to evade specific defenses.
Oh, wow.
So yeah, it's going to be a cat and mouse game.
Yeah, that's a lot to think about.
Yeah.
So as defenses get smarter, attackers have to get craftier.
Yep.
Which kind of leads us nicely into this concept of XDR.
Yes.
Extended detection and response.
Right.
Can you just break that down for people who aren't necessarily security experts?
Sure. So XDR is kind of a natural evolution of how we think about security these days.
Okay.
So instead of looking at individual security layers in isolation, like your endpoint protection or your network monitoring, XDR integrates data from all these different sources. So it brings in your endpoint data, your network data, cloud data, even identity system data.
Okay.
And this unified approach, that holistic view, is really powerful because it allows you to see things that you might not see if you were just looking at one piece of the puzzle.
Right, you can connect the dots.
You can connect the dots.
Okay.
So some key capabilities of XDR include things like deep data integration, so being able to actually correlate data from these different sources. Automation, of course, using things like machine learning to identify patterns, behavioral analysis, so looking for things that are unusual.
Okay.
And then proactive threat hunting.
Yeah.
So security teams can go out and actively look for threats that might not be triggering any alerts. And finally, it gives you the centralized visibility across your entire security infrastructure.
So it sounds like a pretty formidable defense.
It is.
How are red teams trying to find weaknesses in this more interconnected world?
Well, this is where the creativity of the attackers really comes in.
Okay.
There are several common bypass methods that are used.
Okay.
Living off the land techniques are really effective here because they leverage those trusted system tools
Right.
and fileless malware that only operates in memory,
So
so it doesn't leave any traces on the disk.
Okay.
Another tactic is direct system calls.
Okay.
And this is where the attackers bypass the user mode API hooks that a lot of XDR solutions rely on
Right.
by going directly to the kernel, the heart of the operating system.
I see. So they're like going straight to the source.
Exactly. You're bypassing all the intermediaries that might be monitored.
Okay.
Then there are BYOVD attacks.
Okay.
Bring your own vulnerable driver.
What is that?
So in this attack, a legitimate but flawed driver is loaded into the kernel.
Okay.
And this can give the attacker privileged access and potentially allow them to disable security controls.
Oh, I see.
And then we have process injection and hollowing techniques.
Okay.
These are techniques used to insert malicious code into legitimate running processes.
Right.
And that can be used to mask their activity.
Got it.
So attackers might also try things like telemetry interference,
Okay.
where they're actively trying to disrupt the data that the XDR agents are collecting.
Mm.
And then you've got your classic techniques like obfuscation and encryption,
Right.
which are used to conceal the malicious activity.
Yeah.
And in some cases, they even try to exploit the operational challenges that security teams face.
Okay.
Like alert fatigue, where you just have so many alerts coming in, you can't keep track of them all.
Right.
Or issues with incident response.
Yeah.
So they might try to masquerade as normal system activity or try to preemptively remove any traces of their presence.
Oh, wow.
So it's really a sophisticated game.
Yeah, it's a cat and mouse game for sure.
Absolutely.
What can organizations do to defend themselves against these XDR bypass attempts?
Well, there are definitely countermeasures.
Okay.
Enhanced behavioral analysis is really important.
Mhm.
So instead of just looking for known malware signatures, you're looking for anomalies in how systems and users are behaving.
Okay.
Implementing strong kernel-level protections, things like HVCI, hypervisor-enforced code integrity,
Right.
and driver block lists can be really helpful in mitigating BYOVD attacks.
Got it.
You also need to have really good telemetry collection
Mm-hmm.
using methods that are resistant to tampering.
Okay.
Proactive threat hunting is really important as well.
Hmm.
Using the data and the analytics capabilities of XDR, security teams can actually go out and search for threats that might not be triggering alerts.
Yeah.
Then you've got things like adopting a zero trust architecture,
Right.
which assumes that no user or device is inherently trustworthy. And that can really limit the damage even if a bypass is successful.
Got it.
And of course, basic security hygiene,
Right.
things like patching, updates, all that stuff
Yeah.
is still essential.
Keep the basics covered.
Absolutely. And some organizations are also looking at using deception technology. So
Okay.
they're creating decoy systems and data to lure and detect attackers who've managed to bypass the initial defenses.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay, so let's talk about AMSI,
Okay.
the anti-malware scan interface from Microsoft.
Right.
What is that?
So AMSI is a really important security feature that's built into Windows,
Okay.
and it's designed to improve the detection of malicious scripts and other types of dynamic code.
Okay.
So it's a way for applications and services like PowerShell, Windows Script Host, even Office macros
Oh, wow.
to integrate with antivirus products.
Okay.
So this allows for the scanning of script content and even code that's residing in memory for malicious patterns. And this happens before the code gets executed.
Oh.
So it's a way of trying to catch things early.
Yeah, nip it in the bud.
Exactly. It's implemented as a dynamic link library called AMSI.dll.
Okay.
And it uses functions like AMSI scan buffer and AMSI scan string to perform the scans.
I see. So it's pretty fundamental part of Windows security.
It is.
How do red teams think about bypassing it?
Yeah, so it is a significant security layer, but attackers have come up with a bunch of different techniques to try and get around it.
Okay.
One of the simpler ones, although it doesn't always work, is to try to downgrade PowerShell to version 2.0,
Okay.
which predates AMSI.
Right, so it doesn't have it.
Exactly.
Okay.
More sophisticated techniques involve directly patching the AMSI functions in memory to disable them
Oh, wow.
or change their behavior.
Okay.
They also use string manipulation, encoding and decoding to make the scripts appear benign.
Oh, I see.
They might try DLL hijacking,
Okay.
replacing the legitimate AMSI DLL with a modified or malicious version. And they'll use general obfuscation techniques to hide the intent of their scripts.
Right.
Some attackers even try to cause errors within AMSI,
Okay.
hoping to make it fail or stop scanning.
Interesting.
They also use techniques like reflection and API manipulation to indirectly call or modify AMSI functions.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And not surprisingly, living off the land techniques are relevant here as well.
Right.
For example, using scripting engines that don't use AMSI for scanning.
Oh, okay, I see. So that's quite a few different ways to try and bypass it.
Yeah, it's a pretty diverse set of techniques.
Okay. So what can defenders do?
Well, there are several defensive measures.
Okay.
Definitely implement integrity checks to make sure that AMSI.deal hasn't been modified. Monitoring process memory for suspicious changes or patches to AMSI functions is really important as well.
Okay.
Enabling logging,
Mm-hmm.
so you can see what AMSI is doing, can give you insights into bypass attempts.
Okay.
Behavioral analysis can sometimes detect suspicious scripting, even if AMSI has been bypassed. And then just the general, keeping your systems up to date.
Right.
Because Microsoft does release updates to address these bypasses.
Keep patching, keep patching.
Absolutely. And then using advanced EDR or XDR solutions that have specific capabilities for detecting these bypasses can be really helpful as well.
So we've been talking about living off the land attacks quite a bit.
Yes.
What is it that defines this type of activity?
So what makes a living off the land attack special is that the attacker is relying on legitimate tools and features
Okay.
that are already present in the target environment.
Okay.
So these attacks are often fileless, meaning they don't rely on dropping traditional malware executables to disk.
Okay.
Instead, they operate directly in the system's memory, or they use existing system binaries.
So they're kind of blending in with the environment.
Exactly.
Okay.
By using these trusted tools that are already there,
Right.
they can often blend in with normal system activity.
Okay.
And this makes it really hard for traditional security solutions to detect them.
So instead of bringing their own tools,
Right.
they're using the victim's own tools against them.
Exactly.
I see. So what are some examples of these tools, these LOL bins?
Yeah, so these LSMs, or living off the land binaries, are legitimate system executables that can be misused.
Okay.
So a classic example is PowerShell.exe. This is a really powerful command line shell
Right.
that can be used for all sorts of things.
Yeah.
Downloading files, executing scripts, even bypassing security controls.
Wow.
Another example is certitil.exe,
Yep.
which is a command line utility for managing certificates.
Okay.
But it can be abused to download and execute remote files.
Got it.
Then you have wmike.exe,
Yeah.
the Windows Management Instrumentation command line tool,
Mhm.
which lets you query system information and execute commands remotely.
Okay.
regsvr32.exe can be used to register and unregister COM objects and DLLs.
Mhm.
And attackers can use that to execute malicious DLLs.
I see.
and emsht.exe is used to execute HTML applications.
Okay.
But it can be exploited to run malicious JavaScript or VB script.
Oh, wow.
And it's not just about the binaries themselves.
Right.
There are also LOL scripts, which are malicious scripts written in languages like PowerShell, VB script, JavaScript,
Okay.
that use these LOL bins to carry out the attack.
So what makes these LOL attacks so attractive to attackers compared to using like custom malware?
The biggest advantage is definitely stealth,
Okay.
because they're using legitimate signed binaries.
Right.
They can often bypass traditional antivirus and even some EDR systems. It also reduces the attacker's workload.
Yeah.
They don't have to create custom malware for every task.
Yeah, they can just work with what's there.
Exactly. They're using what's already available.
Yeah.
And LOL techniques can be really effective for establishing persistence on a system without leaving any obvious files behind.
You mentioned some specific techniques and mechanisms. Can you give us a few more examples of how this plays out in practice?
Sure. Fileless execution is really important.
Okay.
This is where the code operates entirely in memory,
Right.
leaving no trace on the file system.
Got it.
So techniques like reflective loading,
Okay.
where a malicious DLL is loaded directly into memory without being written to disk.
Okay.
And process injection, where malicious code is inserted into a legitimate process,
Right.
are common methods for achieving fileless execution.
Got it.
They also use LOL bins for privilege escalation and lateral movement.
Okay.
So, for example, a tool called PSExec can be used to execute commands on remote systems using valid credentials for persistence.
Okay.
They might hide payloads within alternate data streams
Okay.
or ADS of legitimate files.
Got it.
Or they might create scheduled tasks using the task scheduler to execute malicious commands at regular intervals.
I see.
And for evasion, they often use obfuscated command line arguments when they're invoking these LOL bins
Right.
to make the activity look less suspicious.
So how do defenders detect and mitigate these LOL attacks, given how stealthy they are?
So the key here is really strong behavioral monitoring.
Okay.
Your security tools have to be able to analyze how these legitimate tools are being used
Okay.
and look for patterns that are outside of the norm. Application whitelisting can be very effective.
Okay.
So you're only allowing specific binaries and scripts to run.
Got it.
Enforcing the principle of least privilege and having strong access controls
Okay.
can also limit the impact.
Right. Even if they do get in.
Exactly.
Okay.
User education is really important.
Yeah.
Helping users recognize suspicious activity that might be a sign of an LOL attack, network segmentation,
Right.
can contain lateral movement if an attack is successful.
Okay.
And then, increasingly, we're seeing AI and machine learning being used to identify anomalous behavior, along with proactive threat hunting, actively going out and looking for signs of malicious activity.
So in addition to all the specific attack techniques we talked about, the red teamer in our interview also talked about some other things that they use to bypass traditional antivirus and the more advanced EDR solutions.
Yeah.
Can you summarize what they said about that?
Sure. When it comes to evading traditional antivirus,
Okay.
attackers often use techniques like code obfuscation and encryption
Right?
to disguise their code. They might create custom binaries or payloads
Okay.
to avoid matching known signatures.
Got it.
Some even use polymorphic or metamorphic malware.
What's that?
Polymorphic or metamorphic malware is malware that actually changes its code with each execution
Oh, wow.
to further evade detection.
That's crazy.
And as we've discussed, fileless malware is also really good at getting past AV. Attackers also use various techniques to evade both static and dynamic analysis. So things like time stomping,
Right.
where you're altering the timestamps on files to make them look legitimate,
Yeah.
using alternate data streams. To hide code,
Okay.
packing or encrypting binaries to make them harder to analyze,
Right.
and even implementing delayed execution or sandbox detection techniques
Okay.
so that the malware only runs when it knows it's not in a controlled environment.
Oh, wow.
And of course, we've already discussed how living off the land techniques can be used to bypass AV as well.
Right.
In some cases, they might even try to modify known malicious signatures
Okay.
to make their own malware look benign.
I see.
So it's really a wide range of techniques.
Yeah.
that they use.
So what about the more advanced EDR solutions?
Right.
How are they trying to bypass those?
Bypassing EDR requires some more advanced techniques.
Okay.
One common approach is unhooking or tampering with API hooks.
Okay.
So EDR solutions often place hooks on important system APIs to monitor their activity.
Right.
But attackers can try to remove those hooks
Yeah.
to prevent the EDR from seeing what they're doing.
I see.
They might also use direct or indirect system calls to communicate with the kernel
Right.
without going through those user mode APIs that are being monitored.
So they're sneaking past the security.
Yeah, they're trying to stay under the radar.
Okay.
Reflective DLL loading, where a malicious DLL is loaded directly into memory without touching the disk,
Right.
can also evade some EDR mechanism.
Okay.
Process injection. We talked about that before. But in this case, with more advanced techniques like process hollowing,
Right.
is often used to run code within a trusted process.
Right.
They might also use memory manipulation
Okay.
to hide their shellcode
Right.
or other malicious payloads in memory.
Okay.
For example, moving it around, encrypting it. Kernel-level evasion,
Okay.
often using vulnerable drivers, can give very deep access and the ability to disable security controls.
I see.
Behavioral evasion is also key.